Hey everyone, I'm Sarah of the Tech Editor Hub, and today, as a guest, I have Whitney Steen. She is here joining us from Chicago. Am I right?
Yes.
All right. So Whitney is a tech editor and graphic designer, and after realizing she had 20 years of work experience editing and designing publication layouts in nonprofit in the academic space, and 25 years of unpaid knitting experience, she decided to combine both of those into a small business. She is also leading a one-woman effort to bring back crafting blogs through the blog of making stuff on her website, which is WLSmakesstuff.com. Thank you for joining me. I'm so excited to have this time with you.
I'm very excited to be here.
So tell us let's always start off with yarn first. What are you making with yarn right now?
So right now I am working on a knitted Afghan from a vintage book that I acquired last year from eBay. So it's
Nice.
This book right here. And I think I have decided that it is now my life's ambition to knit every single Afghan in this book because they're all so amazing. But I've started with this feather and fan
All right, hold
Afghan.
it to the camera. Get it in there.
Yeah,
That's
so
awesome.
and this is because my husband got jealous of the Afghan I knit last year that our cat absolutely adores and sits on every time you put it on your lap, and she's not really a lap cat. So he was like, "Can you make one for my gaming space so maybe she'll come down and sit with me sometime?" So that's what that one is for. But all the way through that whole book because it's such an interesting book.
And Afghans are great for just sitting and knitting.
Yeah, I usually have a couple of different things that are varied. I also usually have a pair of socks going too. So I like to have like a big project and a tiny project and keep going.
Well, I know people are going to ask this, but you have to tell us about your sweater. It's beautiful.
This is the Pink Yodo sweater by Bo Knits. I think it came out it came out a while ago. Her original pattern was knit in a wool cotton blend, and this is a linen silk DK. But I had bought this yarn for a different pattern entirely, and then got partway through it and realized it wasn't going to be something I was going to wear. So I took it all out, and then I had all this linen DK weight yarn and wasn't sure what to do with it. And so I went looking for a t-shirt, and I just really love the like graphic stripes on this.
It's like a plaid, like it's a simple one, and it's all done. Like, is that in Tarja?
So
like
horizontal stripes are knit in it when you knit it, but it's very clever. She has you put a purl stitch where the vertical stitches go, and then you just single crochet up the purl stitches when you're done. Yes. And it's so easy because you can't possibly go sideways because it's already the track is right there for you, and it lays down really nice because of that purl stitch. Yeah. So you can't tell looking at it; it doesn't stick out of the finished fabric at all. But
I love that because plaid and those kind of vertical stripes are hard to do in knitting. So that's really super clever. And linen is awesome for Chicago summer.
I wear this shirt quite a lot in the summertime.
So let's jump in. What were you doing before you became a technical editor, Whitney?
So I went to school for writing and editing. I thought I was going to go into fiction editing, but I got very good advice from a grad school advisor who had worked in the publishing industry and I think could see which way the wind was blowing. 20 some years ago when she gave me this advice she said, if you really want to do hands-on editorial work, don't go into traditional publishing because it'll be years before you're allowed to do that. Like, you can find editorial work in so many other industries. So I took her advice and I took some jobs early in academic administration. They always need people to edit stuff in academic administration because there's so many written things that go out. Plus, the nice thing about academia is if you have a skill that they would have to pay someone else for, and
Right.
you're willing to just do it because you're already
Mhm.
there, they are more than happy to let you do that. But so that was how I kind of got into both doing more editing and also doing more graphic design layout work for the grad school I was working for at the time. I started doing their newsletter mostly because the only other person who knew how to use InDesign quit 2 weeks before we had to hand the student handbook into the printer. And I was like, well, I'll figure out how to make it work. And then after I did that, they let me start doing the newsletter. So I managed to parlay that into a career where my job description actually included you are going to be writing the newsletter and handling the publishing and all of that stuff. So I did that. I moved over to the true nonprofit space about 11 years ago and worked in nonprofit for quite a while doing both the newsletter stuff and the grant and some grant administration work. And that's really kind of what I was doing right up until June of this year.
So what made you decide to become a technical editor if you were already working in a space that was kind of editorial and fulfilling?
Yeah. So actually, about 3, 4 years ago, right before the pandemic, the grant administration side of my job had gotten so massive for my organization that I had to hand off most of my editorial newsletter work to our communications team and really focus more full time on grant administration. And at the time, I was fine with it because I enjoy doing grant administration. There was a lot of stuff I liked about that work. But as time went on, I realized I was really missing like
Mhm.
just popping into the communications team meeting to help with some like story ideas and occasionally proofreading an issue was not really enough of that work to keep me entertained, and just not having that creative part of my work anymore was starting to really wear on me. I mean, I like grant administration, but doing it all day, every day starts to really become a whole, you start to get a little bit tired. And I was also just starting to look for a new challenge. When you've been with one organization for 11 years, there's not a whole lot that pops up that can surprise you anymore. And
It's the same old, same old.
even when it's a new person with a new problem, a lot of times you're like, well, that's like that problem we handled 5 years ago, so we can do it
Right.
that way. So the pandemic hit. And of course, I was sitting at home with a lot of time on my hands. I mean, my organization luckily was able to stay operational, but of course, we weren't doing as many meetings or events or things that we had been doing before. And it was really bringing home to me that it was time to think about what my next step was. And I had found out in 2017 or 18 what a tech editor was from a designer I watched on YouTube at the time. She had described what her tech editor did for her and what that process of getting a pattern back was like. And I was like, wait, that's a job you can do? You can get paid for editing knitting patterns? I think I need to figure this out.
Yes.
So when I was sitting around thinking about like, what is it that I would want to even do if I leave the nonprofit space? And I was like, maybe I should just look around and see how one becomes a tech editor. So I found the Tech Editor Hub and I took Jolie's course in very early 2022 and started looking around for jobs. And things really grew very quickly. And last year, I realized I was at a point where I needed to decide if it was just going to stay a side gig that I only did a limited amount of jobs a month because that was all I could really manage with a full-time job, or if I wanted to really push to grow it into a full-time effort itself. And so I decided that I was ready to go. And in June, I left my full-time job and now I'm doing this full-time.
I love this. I want to dive a little deeper into the difference between tech editing and the
Mm-hmm.
editorial work you were doing before. So you took the course through the Tech Editor Hub. What did that do for you? Like, do you feel like you needed a course because you were already doing editorial work? Or do you feel like it was just practice for you?
I think the course was good in the sense that like there is definitely a lot more math checking
Yes.
involved. You know, I'm definitely used to checking for style. I'm used to checking for appropriate terminology because I came out of the scientific research space. So there was always like the correct way you were supposed to say
Yes.
certain things. But I had not done I'd done fact checking of numbers before because I would develop some metrics for a grant
Right.
program and then I had to check that the communications team was putting them in the right context when they put it
Right.
into things. But I had never had to actually check the math before. So I think the course was particularly helpful for me for that, to like help me work out like how you would go about checking the math. I mean, there's certain things when you've been knitting for over 25 years that you're like, you can spot. And I had done that in the past where like I had spotted an error in a Vogue knitting pattern once when I was knitting it. There is no way that this sleeve cap decreases this way. This just, it can't work.
Exactly.
So, you know, I had actually written them and they were like, oh yes, we had actually we were just about to put that in the errata for that.
Errata. Yeah. Isn't that great?
So, you know, I had a little experience spotting those kind of on my own before, but it was really nice to get like a good methodology for how you work your way through a pattern and check all of that kind of math stuff.
Yeah, I had the same experience because I was training to be a copy editor before I found the Tech Editor Hub course. And I realized it was such a stretch of the editorial muscles to go so slow, to look at every number, every space, it was like copy editing on steroids. And I was unfamiliar with this. I think there was a lot in my copy editing work that it was real easy for me. And when you have to go really slow and look at every comma, every semicolon, every number, and then relate it all back to the previous, yeah, it's definitely challenging to the brain because of the math.
Yeah.
So tell us what your workspace is like. Where do you like to work? Where do you do your tech editing? Like, do you change it up or do you have one spot?
I am very lucky to have a fairly nice, sizable office in our house. We were lucky in that we bought this house a little over 18 months ago. So I was already tech editing when we were looking. So we were
You had
able
it
to
in
kind
mind?
of pick a house with, you know, I'm going to need a workspace. My husband's going to need a workspace, and make sure that we were both happy with the workspaces we were moving into. Is in a large spare bedroom on our second floor that overlooks the front of the house. It gets a lot of afternoon sunlight, which is my favorite kind of sunlight. I much prefer a lot of sun in the afternoon instead of in the morning. I have lots of plants in here. I have lots of storage for all of my craft stuff. It's a really nice space. I do still want to paint in here. It's still the color it was when we moved in, but
That grayish, isn't
yeah,
it?
I mean, it's a little bit bluer than your traditional grayish, so it's not intolerable. I actually have a pretty high tolerance for gray, but I have picked out some mauve colors that I would like to paint this apartment.
Nice.
So,
So tell us about your setup. Do you use more than one monitor? How do you like? When you come to
yeah.
work? Like,
Mhm.
what's happening in front of you?
I have a massive double wide monitor that I purchased back when I had a very tiny space. And then I also use my laptop as a secondary monitor. And then I have an external keyboard and mouse that plug in via. So I have a pretty flexible workspace so that I like to have, when I'm checking through a pattern, I have like usually have my spreadsheet with my math on one screen, and then I have like the pattern itself in front of me. I have up any photos that I need to reference, all of my little tabs on my computer to anything that I might need to get at. But mostly it's on this big double wide monitor, which I can put two documents side by side on if I need to. So
Love it. I
yeah.
feel like this is a part of the technology for setting up as a tech editor we need to
Mhm.
talk about more. Like, you're going to struggle if you've got a small monitor, if you're working off of one laptop screen. When I travel, I would try to work off of one little screen,
Mhm.
and I would be like, I miss my big monitors to be able to look at the pattern and the spreadsheet at the same time. It's just super, super useful.
Yeah.
So what's been the hardest part of tech editing for you?
I think right now it's that because I am moving into a new industry and leaving behind like a job I was in for so long that I had everything organized exactly the way I wanted it. So right now it's just getting my organization together. There's a lot of kind of trial and error whenever you start a new job where it's like, I think this is how I'm going to organize
Right.
it. And then you're like, well, no, I don't actually use that spreadsheet because it's too fussy or whatever. And then you start organizing it a different way. So I'm still kind of building out what my organizational systems are going to be. And because of that, sometimes it takes a little longer than I would like to find answers to things.
Yeah.
I have the materials and I know where to go for the answers, but I don't have just that memory of like, oh yes, that particular answer about that sleeve construction is in this book, which I keep right here. It's just kind of getting that system sort of established.
Yeah. And it just takes time and practice and a lot of sticky notes.
I have converted to OneNote because we started using it at my last job, and it's like sticky notes, but they're searchable. So if you really can't remember where you filed that note about something and it's in there, you can just put it in the search bar and it will tell you where it is.
I think this is excellent. It's really great to even like start to create your own encyclopedia and to help remember how did I solve that problem, or who did I go, whose blog post was that, or how did this come together? Yeah.
Yeah.
We have to make resources for ourselves because there isn't a lot.
Right. Yeah. Working in grant administration, there were a lot of projects that we only did once a year. And so I got very used to making checklists and like, this is how we do this process. Because if you only do something once a year, you're not going to remember the next time you come to it. You'll half remember what you did, but you'll miss something important. So I'm kind of in the habit already of like logging, exactly how I did a certain thing so that I can go back to it later.
Right. And we may think as editors, because we're solo entrepreneurs, if we're working freelance, I don't need a system or I don't need an operating system. But in reality, that's how you free up your brain space to be able to edit better, is to create these systems where you just got to look at the list. Okay, do this next. Okay, do this next. Oh, go here for this. So
yes. Yeah, the more you can automate, the more efficient.
Yes. So on that note, what references or tools do you find yourself always reaching for in your work? What key things that you can't work without?
I really need OneNote. Like I have just become the way that software works. I've tried a lot of different like project organization software, and the way that software works is the flexibility my brain wants. And like I said, the searchability is great because sometimes I don't remember where I filed something, and then that will help find it, because I like that you can put it up, you can set it up kind of like a book where you have sections and then you have sections within those sections and you can cross-reference back to other things. By the time I left my last job, I had 2 very extensive OneNote notebooks about the 2 parts of my job that I was doing, and was able to leave those behind for the people who took over my job, so that they had, and I was like, this is a living document. This is not like, this is the only way you can do this. So, take it, change it, do whatever you want with it, but this will at least get you started. And so that's what I'm currently working on building for tech editing for myself.
That is amazing. That's really, really brilliant. Tell us, what is the best piece of wisdom that you've heard or read lately? And it doesn't have to be related to editing.
So I watch a lot of makers on YouTube of just about everything, not just knitters or crocheters, but I also watch a lot of like people who make robots and people who build crazy props for cosplay. And one of the women I'm currently watching right now, she is creating a bookmobile. And so I was watching her video about like getting her bookmobile all constructed, and she had to go back and redo something because when she painted the logo on, it had been a very pollen-y day in the area where she lived, and the pollen was making the logo not stick to the truck. And she said this thing, and it really struck with me because it kind of hit where I'm currently at right now, where she said, like, when you have to go back and redo something that you already finished, it can feel like you're going backwards. But if you're learning something new, that's just part of the process. And I thought that was so well articulated, and it hit so well, both because when I watched that video, I happened to have been working on a crochet chart that I had to kind of go back and redo, because I realized like halfway into it, I was like, oh, this will be much better structured if I set it up this way. And I was a little frustrated with that. So it really reminded me that, like, you know, I'm still in the early stages here. So like, I'm still, you know, some of this is new to me. Some of this is just, you know, a new way of thinking about something that I've been doing for a long time. So it's a good reminder that just like, if you're learning something new, and I think it's a good reminder for designers too, because, you know, I've worked with a lot of people who were doing their first sweater pattern after designing other things. And they would get frustrated that like I had so many comments about how their sleeves were put together. And it's like, yes, but this is your first sweater, and it's going to take some time to like make sure we have it correct.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like there isn't a time that this isn't happening. I feel like because we work in an area that's kind of infinite, like there's an infinite way of doing things, and people are always innovating, and there's always new ways of looking at things. I think it helps to have this open mindset that it's okay to redo things, and it's okay to learn a new way of doing things, or to experiment a little bit. I like this in the conversation with the clients too. Like, you know, what about this? What if we tried this? And then sometimes that sparks something in the designer, and they come up with something just absolutely clever and brilliant that I never would have thought of. So there's things that can happen in that conversation too, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
So do you have any advice for editors who are just starting out? Like, if you could travel back to right when you started that course or whatever and whisper some wisdom to yourself, what would you say?
I think one of the things I would say, I wish that I had started doing formal office hours earlier.
Wait, hold on. Formal office hours. Maybe
Okay.
define what that is.
So when I was just doing this while I was working full time, I had been kind of messing around and looking for clients probably for 6 or 8 months. And I had this long list of things I needed to do to get my business up and running, you know, website set up and filing for my DBA with the state and various other things. And it just like, there was this endless list of things to do. And I would work on them sometimes on the weekends, but I didn't have any like set time. It would just be as I had time outside of my job. And so at one point, I don't even remember, I feel like I got this idea off somebody at the Tech Editor Hub, and I'm not sure who said something about having regular office hours. And I was like, you know, maybe that would help, because if I had a set schedule for when I'm going to work on this, you know, then it wouldn't be like, oh, I did 8 hours this week, but then I didn't do any the next week, and things would get done faster. So I started doing 2 hours, 2 evenings a week. I made sure my husband was aware of like what my schedule was, and we made sure that like we worked our dinner time around the evenings I had set. And so it didn't matter whether I had a client or not. If I didn't have a client, I came up and did business admin stuff, did content for the blog, or set other things up. And if I had a client, I would work on the work for the client. Sometimes if I had a client, I had to do more than 4 hours a week, but it at least got me kind of started. And it changed the way I thought about my work, because it stopped being just this thing I am doing for fun on the side and became, this is my actual business and I'm making time for this. And it just kind of changed even the way my husband and I talked about it, where he would be like, oh, are you working this evening? And it just, it started, I started taking it much more seriously. And I wish I had even started doing that even earlier in the process, because it just really helped me start thinking of this as a job that I am doing seriously and not just like this fun little hobby I'm doing on the side.
That's
Plus, I got a
cool.
lot done.
Yes. And it's funny how those hours add up, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how even just 4 hours a week, things forward so much faster than if I had just been kind of doing them whenever I thought, oh, let's go spend a couple hours on the computer.
It's being intentional with your work
Mhm.
time. And do you think that helps you focus more too?
I do. I think, yeah, knowing that like, oh, this is office hours, evening. And then I even start thinking a little bit ahead of time, like, okay, what's my goal for today? What do I want to get done before I finish? And it just kind of helps with, yeah, the mindset of the planning and how things need to progress. And
I love that.
yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's
Mhm.
really valuable for everyone, even me. I will tell you, I don't have sometimes set office hours every week. And yeah, this is super helpful. So, what's something in your business that you're happy worked out differently than you expected?
Well, for one, I'm very happy with how quickly I was able to go full time. It just, when you're just starting out, it really does take a while to get that first client that's willing to say yes to you.
It's a
And
struggle.
then sometimes it takes a while to get that second client that's willing,
Yeah.
but then, it slowly starts to pick up steam. And once it starts going, and once you find that first client or two who are willing to come back to you and give you regular work, then it's surprising how quickly it starts to build up. So that's been probably the thing I've been most pleased is how quickly I've been able to ramp up things.
I love that. I'm so excited for you because I feel like this is the struggle for all of us who are becoming technical editors is,
Mhm.
okay, I want to edit. Okay, now I need some work. And
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
really excited.
yeah, and it is social media is not as reliable as it once was for finding people.
Right.
So having the hub and being able to build a network through the hub has also been super helpful, just
That's
to
awesome.
make connections and get to know what other people are doing, and like have, when a client comes to me with a project I can't do, it to be like, I actually know someone. I can find someone that can help you with this.
Love it.
It's always really nice.
Thanks for being a part of our community. It's really special. So, what is your favorite way to take a break from editing?
Well, if I'm not knitting or crafting something, I am usually in my garden. When we bought this house, I got very interested in gardening because we finally had outdoor space that I could do whatever I wanted to. And so I have been dabbling a little bit in plants and trying to grow a tiny amount of vegetables. And we're about to do like a major overhaul of our front garden bed because it got kind of a mess and needs to be redone. So that's a really nice way to take a break and let my mind kind of relax. I also run a little bit, and that's a really good way to take my mind off stuff if I'm frustrated or I'm stuck on a problem, to just go do something physical for a little while and just kind of get my head completely out of that thinking space has been really, really good.
Do you find that you solve problems while you're running?
Sometimes I feel like it's more often that I get done with running and then my brain kind of clicks back in and is like, that's what I do. Like it's not so much during the process, but it's like that little break. And then when it turns itself back on, it knows how to solve things.
I feel like people don't realize that our tool for editing is our brain, and we have to really take care of it as editors. So, what are your hopes for yourself?
So I really hope that I can continue building this into a sustainable business. I have some ideas about things I want to build out that will help maybe lower the entry to graphic design for knitters and crocheters specifically, because I know that's something that, I mean, that's such a expensive thing to get if you don't have any skills in graphic design yourself. So that's one place where I feel like I can help lower the cost of producing an independent pattern. Tech editing is something that you need to spend the money on and you need to spend the time on. But if I can lower some of the other bits, then you have more budget for that. So that's one thing I want to try to work on. So I have a lot of ideas on that front.
Awesome. And we need that. I feel
Mhm.
like that's huge part, especially if people are creating, you can pull together a pattern in a Word document, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's well designed graphically. So yeah, that's excellent. Where can people find you online? And I'm going to grab your website and toss a banner up here, but tell us about what you do. If you're taking on clients, what kind of services you offer and where people can find you.
Sure. So I offer tech editing and graphic design to knitters and crocheters. I don't tech edit crochet, but I do offer crochet charts and layout services or any other kind of graphic design a crocheter might need. I do tech edit knitting, lots of different kinds of things. I'm very good at toys and accessories, but I have also done sweaters and other things. So I am at wlsmakestuff.com. You can find a list of my services there, but you can also find my blog of making stuff where I talk about all kinds of things, some things that are tech editing specific. I did a series on proofreading tips last year. I talk a little bit. I also have a Spoonflower fabric shop where I do a little bit more of my super creative graphic design. So I will sometimes test out some of the Spoonflower products with various craft projects. And then I talk a lot about things I've knit and what I've learned from them in a fairly regular series on the blog there. So if you just like to hear people talk about things they've made and get ideas and tips, that's always a good place to go as well.
Thank you for sharing all that with us. Oh, it's been such a pleasure to talk with you, Whitney. I love hearing about your work and your progress as a tech editor. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
And if you all are watching this on a replay and you have a question for Whitney, toss it down into the comment section below and I will forward it to her and make sure she gets to answer it. Take care of yourself, Whitney. Happy editing, and thank you for being here.
Thanks. Bye.